All right. Good afternoon. We are going to go ahead and start the Southern Nevada Enterprise Community Board meeting. We're going to call it to order, and Madam Secretary, can you please do roll call?
Chair Neal. Vice Chair Steele.
Present.
Member Horsford. Excused. Member Career. Excused. Member Monroe Moreno. Excused. Member Scott.
Here.
Member McNeil.
Here.
Member Garcia Anderson.
Here.
Member McCurdy. Excused. We have quorum.
Okay, thank you for that. So we'll move to agenda item number 2. I believe we're in compliance with the open meeting law, and we are now going to
Yes,
we are in compliance with the open
Yes.
meeting law. All right, thank you. And so we will now move to agenda item number 3, which is public comment. If there's anyone here for public comment, if you could please come to the mic, state your name. You have 2 minutes. Okay, seeing no one here for public comment, we will go ahead and move to agenda item number 4, which is for possible action to approve the final minutes by reference of the regular meeting of March 18th, 2024. Has everyone had a chance to review and read the minutes from March 18th? Okay, so I will take a motion to approve the minutes from March 18th, 2024.
Motion to approve.
So I have a first from Vice Chairman Steele. Do I have a second?
Second.
So I have a second from Ms. McNeil. And all in favor, say aye.
Aye.
Any opposed? Seeing no opposition, the motion passes to adopt the minutes from March 18th, 2024. With that, we will close that item and then move to agenda item number 5, which is a report by Karen Snog, who's the management analyst for City of Las Vegas regarding the summary of the budget status report of the Southern Nevada Community Project Fund.
Thank you, Karen Schnog, for the record. The balance in the summary budget report for the SNEC board is $7,132.05.
Thank you for that. You got to love interest. All right. So with that, are any questions on that summary? Seeing none, we will close that agenda item and move to agenda item number 6, which is the presentation by Mr. Edmond, who's the representative for EDA, United States Economic Development Administration, regarding the administration's investment priorities.
Danielle Monroe Moreno has joined.
I don't quite know how we.
So
Good afternoon.
I'll give a little
Ladies and
backdrop.
Huh?
You want me to give a little backdrop before you start?
Said it again.
Do you want me to give a little backdrop before you start? Or
Yeah.
Okay. So here's what's going on for the board. We have had a SEDS since 2015. However, the SEDS needs to be updated, but there's also a SEDS within Clark County under LVGEA. So there are 2 SEDS. Going forward, the plan is to only have 1 SEDS so that we can deal with this particular community and the inequities and put it in the broader plan for the county. And so this presentation is just to give us a high-level overview of what is the investment strategy of the EDA, or the investment priorities, so you can understand why we're moving in this direction and why we have this goal of trying to get the inequities of West Las Vegas, North Las Vegas, in the next SEDS that will be approved, or that's the plan, to get that approved. So with that, that's our backdrop.
So, as it relates to the SNAP board and the SEDS and the investment in the priorities on what should become a SED going forward, the Global Alliance had the original SEDS back from 2000, let's say, because you get 5 years worth of funding, EDA funding, and it is due for renewal next year, this coming year. I haven't had a chance to speak directly with Global Alliance administration, but I can say that when I first got involved with EDA, that one of the first questions that I asked the administration of Global Alliance was the fact of how much information in these SEDS that really pertain to the low-income areas, i.e. historic West Side, East Las Vegas, and so forth and so on. And they didn't really have an answer from it. They said, well, you need to talk to the city and so forth and so on. So knowing that it's got to be updated, it's due to be updated every 5 years based on the information that I've read about the board of the SNAP board, that it more in line with what EDA's priorities are as it relates to the areas that really deserve to have more attention and more priorities placed upon as it relates to high unemployment, creating of jobs, creating of good paying jobs. So with that, I would just like to put on record that I would sponsor, not necessarily sponsor, but I would try and see if SNAP do put in an application that EDA looks real favorable on trying to see if they could become the new head of SEDS for Southern Nevada. So can put that out there so that you guys can understand that from an EDA point of view, that we're looking for the SED to really be able to, going forward, to really be able to have meat in it and have proposed things that will actually in line with what some of the real needs are. Not so much from a textbook point of view, but from an actual on the ground, visiting with your stakeholders, with the priority people in the community that's doing business and that want to do business within the SNAP designated areas. Let's see, what else we got on? Well, of course, the EDA, the projects to advance across America through investments, but, you know, you can read this stuff and, you know, it basically talked about the types of priority type things that EDA is involved in and would be involved in and do as it relates to economic development within certain geographical areas. And the next slide here pertains to, since 2019, there has been a total of $19 million. And that was when I first joined EDA back in 2019. So prior to that, I don't know what was happening, probably not that much. And a lot of it have to do with the fact that the Southern Nevada or Nevada as a whole did not have a representative from EDA that actually, you know, live in the community, know the community, and so forth and so on. So as you can see, these are some of the projects that has been funded. Mostly all these projects was talked about before the application was submitted, and of course, all of these projects are funded. There are other projects within the state of Nevada that has gotten EDA funding, such as Boulder City, that Dark Skies, they got Adventure Dome, you got stuff up in northern Nevada, a couple of Native American tribes, and so forth and so on. So EDA is very active as it relates to trying to do projects here in Nevada. And my job is to try to see if I can help SNEP would be, or whoever that would be in charge of, you know, the process as relates to creating of jobs, help them process whatever they need to do to be able to align themselves with the EDA process. We talked a little bit about the strategy, which is, you know, which kind of aligns with the capacity of guiding economic prosperity and resilience in the area, so forth and so on. So basically, and you see at the bottom there, it says that the region must update the SEDS at least every 5 years. So that's what I'm saying, that's coming online right now, that the new a new SEDS that would actually be designated, recognized by EDA, is up for renewal. There's two trains of thoughts about this, and that is to whether or not the SNEP want to work in conjunction with the Global Alliance and see if they can come to some kind of harmonious agreement that can work together. And if that's not the case, then we'll see what happens from there. Let's see, that's probably a summary of the background. So, and again, you got the LVGEA, and then the SNEP said that was created in 2022, and from a EDA perspective, the SNEP said would have more priority going forward because it would align more with what's happening in today's economy. Today is what happening in the communities around the city, and the representation that the SNED board brings to the communities and to represent Southern Nevada as a whole. Any questions?
Any questions from members about the presentation? We can just, you're okay with asking any questions on any page, right? Or I think it's just, there's just, I think the next is the case studies, which is different, right? It's gonna be you presenting that. So any questions on what was presented?
Chair, through you, this is Deputy City Clerk Brian Carroll. Could you just have the speaker confirm his name for the record?
Can you confirm your name, Mr.?
Say it again.
Confirm your name.
Name is John Edmond.
Okay, thank you for that. So, Ms. Garcia?
Thank you. Thank you, Senator Neal.
Gotta speak up. I have a hard time.
Yeah, so you're Mr. John Edmond, correct? Thank you. Thank you for the
Didn't hear you.
presentation.
Can't hear you.
You can't hear me? Is this not on?
What's she say? It's an echo kind of from here.
All right, I'm gonna turn it off.
Okay. Yes.
Thank you, Mr. Edmond, for that great presentation. I just had a quick question. I'm not an expert, in all of the things that you discussed, but I had a question in regards to, what additional information would be helpful to you so that we can have a better understanding of the needs in this community that you were referring to, so we can include it in a kind of set. So you mentioned employment, what else would be useful to you?
Well, you know, I mean, it's not kind of up to me. It's kind of up to you or the individuals, you know, by going out and talking with the people in the community about what the needs are. You know, I mean, I kind of know some of the needs just because I'm a native and local, but, you know, it would be kind of up to the board members and the constituents and the elected officials to be able to, to do community presentations, to do outreach, and to find out what actually some of the needs are within the community. The reason why I was said that SNP would be a better fit because the majority of them are elected within the districts of the SEDS, and they should have somewhat more of a more need because, like yourself as a representative, you talk quite a bit with your constituents as to what some of the needs are within their actual community.
So, any other questions? Because I'll give a clarifying point. So basically, the SEDS and the community outreach and conversations is a very targeted community conversation that will be had by the board, not by individual members, to go and get information and talk, right? Because not really talk, but listen under categories so that we can hear from them probably what we already know, but just getting that anecdotal and community information on what they see as the highest, greatest needs, and probably the longevity, right, of those needs. We know particularly West Side, there are parts of North Las Vegas that have had the same historical issues for more than 20 years, right? And they have not been managed or eviscerated. And so this is a chance to try to get some kind of planning, number one, around it and targeted priorities so we can try to move the community forward. So it's like the point and moment in time where the SNCC board has been on this journey, but we are now trying to do a very much targeted focus on changing the inequity and having a plan that's established by the members of this board and being the conduit to the community to have those conversations and then list those investment priorities to then move those communities forward. And so that is our goal. So after we, go through this process, we'll probably start doing those meetings after probably June 12th, because there's a short time period in which we need to operate, but we also know that there are other things that are competing, and so we're going to get out into the community and have some conversations, but that will be guided and very much targeted, not random. And so I just wanted to say that, and I'll close that out.
And that's really what is needed. Not so much of textbook type, but from actual on the ground in the community. Listen to folks and what some of the needs are. What do they think that the only thing sort of about the average citizen. The average citizen is not necessarily a developer or anything of that nature. So, as far as what they may think, you have to dissect all of that in comparison to what the surroundings, the community, and so forth and so on. But, I really would like to see within the next 3 years with this board, let's say, that they is able to have some real concrete priorities on the table, and maybe even to a point to where, some of this stuff is being funded. Like when I first got on the board, the very first project, Frank Woodbeck, maybe some of you know him or not, he was with community college, and he was saying that they had this workforce development training center that been sitting in EDA's hopper for a couple of years and back and forth. No one hadn't really responded to them about it. And when it came to my attention, it's like, yeah, that's a start of some of the things that the community needs. A workforce development training center would be a good thing for the community. So, those kind of projects is the kind of project I know that the EDA is looking for, and those are the kind of projects that I'd like to see you guys get more involved in as far as what are some of the real concrete, tangible things that could be done to forward the community. And it's, keep in mind that it's the community would consist of not so much just the west side, but East Las Vegas, North Las Vegas, all the impoverished areas.
Thank you for that. Any questions? So, all right, so I think everybody's clear. It's focused on poverty, it's focused on inequity. The board will lead the discussion. The board will get out into the community and have very targeted, clear data, that anecdotal information that we can bring back. And then we're gonna use our next set of meetings to get data around some of the core issues that we know are going on, that have always been going on. And so we're going to be at the front and center point to create a plan and move this community forward, period. So that's the goal. Change. All right, so with that, we appreciate you, Mr. Edmond, bringing your time and giving us this presentation and telling us about the investment priorities and what you want to see, which helps to further frame where we want to go. And so with that, we will close out agenda item number 6.
Thank you.
And we will move to agenda item number 7, which is the presentation by Ms. Barajas, Director of Neighborhood Services, and Kathy Thomas, who is the Chief Housing Officer for Southern Nevada Regional Housing Authority, regarding equity in the Las Vegas historic West Side and East Side communities.
Thank you, Madam Chairwoman. Kathy Thomas, for the record, Chief Housing Officer with the Southern Nevada Regional Housing Authority. And I'm sure there's some folks wondering, why is the Chief Housing Officer here? Aside from the fact that I think housing is foundational in community building, 6 months ago, I actually had the privilege of working with the city and had the opportunity to work on a number of the projects that I'm about to hit the highlights for you. And more importantly, I was charged with facilitating the diversity, equity, and inclusion work for the city. My colleague Arcelia Barajas is here with me as well, and we'll talk fast so we can answer a lot of questions later. I always like to start conversations about equity by setting the framework. What do I mean by equity? And so this informs the rest of the work moving forward. Often equity and equality are terms that are used interchangeably. For the purposes of the work that we are engaging in now, they are not the same thing. Equality is giving everybody the same thing, regardless of what they ask for, what they want, what they need. Everybody gets the same thing because we're trying to be fair. Equity asks a different question. It doesn't ask a fairness question, it asks a justice question. And equity says you give people what they need so that they can fully participate as citizens in the community. So I love these two graphics because the top half of the graphic shows everyone getting the same resource, in this case a bicycle. If I'm differently abled, that bicycle might not work for me at all. If I'm tall and lanky, it's too small. If I'm a little kid, it's too big. We all got the same resource, but it doesn't support us participating in community. Equity looks at how am I going to use that resource to participate fully. Let's look at it another way. We don't always pass out bicycles, but we do infrastructure work. Often when we do infrastructure work, we're not thinking about the types of folks who are going to use that infrastructure. Equality means you put up the same kind of sign, you do the same kind of curb in every neighborhood across your community. But everyone can't see that sign. Everyone can't navigate that curb. Equity says you put in different kinds of ramps because people using wheelchairs or walkers, people who are elderly or who have mobility challenges, everybody can use the ramp. Your signals are both visual and auditory because everyone can use that signal, right? This is how we apply equity. Side note, all of the jurisdictions represented on the SNEC board actually do have equity statements. I'll say that again for the record. Every jurisdiction represented on the SNEC board has a written commitment to equity. In the context of the work that we've been doing in neighborhoods, we're going to just bring you case studies. Your influence obviously is larger than the areas that I'll be talking about or that Arcelia will be talking about. So we're just doing case studies today to give you an idea of how we can take a lot of information, a lot of data, and build on it as an opportunity to create a SEDS that is regional in its scope and equitable in its approach. So the historic West Side has a number of planning documents that are alive. Like, work is currently being done to implement the 100 Plan, which is an acronym for Historic Urban Neighborhood Development Redesign. The West Side also has a Neighborhood Revitalization Strategy Area, NRSA. That's a HUD designation that is related to Community Development Block Grant dollars. With that designation, a lot of the red tape attached to those block grant dollars becomes eliminated for the city of Las Vegas, and it gives you an opportunity to invest more of those dollars in the public service side of the house, since most CDBG funds are strictly capital. So if you were doing resident capacity building, for example, if you were doing some training and support, if you were strengthening resident advisory boards, having an NRSA allows you to support those kinds of activities in your community. It's important to know that you have a lot of data at your fingertips. And so I often say that our plans should not be data-driven. They should be value-driven and data-informed. And the value we're talking about today is equity. So just some highlights. This particular part of the community, the historic West Side, has the highest unemployment rate in the region at over 13%. During COVID, it was closer to 33%, which is higher than it was in the Great Depression in the 30s. Remember, unemployment numbers only tell you about people in the workforce looking for work. It does not tell you how many disaffected workers who have simply given up. So although that's the official number and it's very high, I encourage you to remember it only captures the folks who are actively looking for work, and so the number could be double that number. You have 34% living below the poverty level. The median income is just over $24,000. Now, area median income for this region is over $80,000, but in this neighborhood, it's $24,900. 67% are renters. They don't own their homes, and as we know, for many, home ownership is their greatest asset, and it's an asset that can be used to leverage for other assets, to own a business, send your kids to college. In this community, less than 70% are owners. They're mostly renters. Almost 10% are rent burden, meaning they're paying more than 30% of their income for rent. It's a highly impacted community in terms of English as a second language, mostly BIPOC residents. Only 5.5% have college degrees, and until recently, there had been no substantial private investment in more than 70 years. There have been public investment dollars, but no private investment in more than 70 years. You know the challenges. You all live in and or represent the community. You understand better than anyone that there has been historic disinvestment in the community. Here's the focus area that a lot of the plans that I mentioned earlier are doing their work. And here are some of the strategies that are coming out of the 100 Plan, which is about creating economic opportunities, connectivity, addressing food insecurity, and ensuring equitable public and private investments. To date, over $77 million have been invested. Keep in mind, the majority of these investments are connected to, not the majority, a significant proportion came out of the COVID era. So one-time resources that won't sustain development. Gives it a jump start, gives us an opportunity to engage, but aren't those long-term investments that you see when you have a coordinated strategy that's looking long-term. So some of the integrated strategies that are emerging now are looking at leveraging both public and private investments so that the planned public investments in roadways and the tree canopy will attract private dollars to build housing or bring in other types of amenities. A big issue that we have heard from the community is don't displace us. So while you're doing development, don't displace us. And so while we are reversing disinvestment by attracting new resources, it's been very important that we look at economic development for the current residents and that we are focused on neighborhood improvement for the folks who live and work here now. Yes, ma'am.
I know but I don't want to lose this question. I want to ask you this. So all of the planning documents that were listed, and I'm trying to remember, and I need to go back and read them. Did any of them go in and actually focus on redirection and realignment and change the metrics for what we have designated for the educational foundation to get to an economic development, I guess, center, right, and movement? Because if, when you read out the data, 5% having a higher education and the predominance of schools and everything that's been in this space, you're not ever going to have an economic development plan that moves to full fruition when you have low economic education attainment, which is driving your work, right, your workforce. Those are bedrock pieces. So I don't know if it was dealt with in the 100 Plan, if the metrics changed, if the private investment strategy was discussed or examined on how to bring dollars into that space to leverage poor communities to another layer. As I just needed to ask that because I want to know if that's a yes or a no, because if it's a no, or we're trying to, then I want you to answer, why has it not been effective in whatever strategy you put forth over the past 5 years?
Thank you for the question. Kathy Thomas for the record. The answer is yes and. Yes, there have been efforts looking at both education and training. So for a number of those plans, for example, the 100 Plan actually started as a partnership with UNLV. The 100 Plan in Action, which is the work strategy, is partnering with CSN, looking at a number of things. One is the non-traditional routes to education. One is technical and trades training, as well as traditional 2- and 4-year degree granting kinds of programs. So Mr. Edmond mentioned the EDA grant that's part of a workforce education and training center. That will focus on sort of the bread and butter work of our community in hospitality, but it will also look at healthcare and other kinds of emerging industries so that we can train individuals there. The city had a, what do you call the health workers, the community health workers with CSN? So the city, sorry, I had to back check myself. So the city had a community health worker training that led to a dialysis tech training so that people could do career ladders within emerging fields, in this case, specifically healthcare, that would not necessarily require a 4-year degree. So these plans are not overlooking traditional routes to training and education. They're seeking to expand those routes because I can complete a community health worker training and a dialysis training or phlebotomist training and get closer to living wages in a shorter period of time, and then start exploring things like nursing or physician assistants, other things that might require a 2 or 4 year degree. But in the meantime, I'm working and earning. The city's been very focused on what they call stackable credentials, so that I start here with basic computer training. Technology is one of the fields that will be addressed. And I start with basic kinds of training, and then I get into programming, and then I get into media, et cetera, so that I can stack these credentials and become more competitive in a job right now. And I may make decisions 12 months in that say, you can go this route, stay in the trades, or you can go that route and pursue a degree, but really trying to have more choice for people that live in the community so they can earn and learn simultaneously.
Can I ask you this? So within that strategy, do you have data on the ladders? Meaning, when I say data on the ladder, so if you started off as a community health worker making $15 an hour, how many of those individuals who, like, say, let's say our baseline was there were 50 African American women or 50 Latina women who went in community health worker in 2019. Maybe they were delayed and offset in 2021 during COVID. But where have we seen them take the stackable credential and then elevate, right? And how do we have data that shows the varying categories and saying, well, out of the 50, 25 have now moved to pursue a nursing degree, or they have expanded, so now we're in 2024, we should see some upward mobility and movement within their income, and we should also see an upward mobility in their training, because it's what I'm hearing is that the side-by-side strategy, there should also be some mentorship and management on this side saying, hey, young women who we got into this program in 2019, where are you now? It is time to elevate. It is time to go to the next level. You've spent 5 years as a community health worker. This is no longer sustainable. This was never our plan. This was never our workforce plan for you. Where do we have that data? Do we need to create that data? If it exists, where can I find it and read it?
We need to create it and sustain it. So for the program participants, because it was a grant-funded program, they were followed through the duration of the grant. They did get job placement as a part of that grant. And so we can tell you where they were 6 months after the grant ended. I can't tell you where they were 18 months after the grant ended. And so that's one of the challenges of having a really comprehensive SEDS. What you have now, no shade, I was the one doing the work, so I'm not shading anybody, but what you have is time-limited, grant-funded programming. And you ask the question in there, why haven't we sustained it, or why doesn't it, I'm paraphrasing, Chairwoman. You want to know?
The ladders, like, so, I mean, but basically you kind of already answered it, right? It was one-time funding.
Yes.
There was no, in the funding strategy, there was nothing in the request that said, yeah, we want this money, but we also need this money to make sure we can follow. It's like what we're trying to do in education that's not working. How we follow the kid, follow the worker, so that we have enough money to follow the worker, to watch their success, to watch the seed that we planted grow into a tree. We didn't have the money for the seed, the sapling, or the tree, and now we don't know where these people are, but yet I'm just putting it out there, that we did a strategy. Awesome, thank you for the strategy and the one-time money. But it's not, so, because I'm listing this as a weakness that we need to examine, and going forward, if there are any dollars that walk into this future project or future idea, we need to make sure that we're totally wraparound supporting our worker, that we get into a program so that they're really stacking, they're really moving the ladder, their economic mobility is really changing, and we have a staff person or several community members or organizations that are wrapping themselves around those persons so that we can get that data. If they're falling off track, watch the investment really work itself over 5 to 6 years. And we did not do that, but we did a hallelujah and thank you, Jesus, give us the $1 million, run this program, but with no back end. That's what I heard.
Because that's what I said, Chairwoman. Yeah, that's what I said, that it was grant funded. I didn't know if you knew, but it was $1 million.
I just pulled that out the sky.
No, ma'am, it was $1 million. I'm sorry, Kathy Thomas for the record. Let me get back on track, because we would be having a conversation. So, your characterization is accurate, that we stand up impactful programming, and we take the seed to a sapling. And when it's time to take the sapling and pot it someplace so it grows into a tree, we haven't historically had the resources to do that. And so if you're asking the equity question about how resources, we gave everybody a bicycle, and for some folks, they could ride to their destination. And we can share those, the city can share those stories with you. For some folks, it was good for a moment, but it wasn't exactly the resource they needed, and there were not money and staff in place that could then move folks. Folks are just going to need different things to achieve economic self-sufficiency, and historically, things have been one size fits all because the funding dictates a particular thing.
So let me ask you this. Do we have the original cohort? Do we have the data on where they are, and how many cohorts like that were done in Las Vegas, done in the county, done in North, or can we find that crossover data?
So we have the data for the HEAL program, the Health, Equity, and Literacy program is what it was called. We do have the data. This was actually a grant submitted in partnership with UNLV, so it was a research study on how community health workers can impact the health that's received by our residents. And so we do have the data. We do have data that supports some of the community health workers that received full-time training through the program. So we have all of their contact information. Like Kathy mentioned, we did, contact them for an after-program survey, and so we do have some data on kind of what their thoughts were, what they were looking to do in the next phase. But after that, we close out the grant, so we haven't reached out to them after that. But we do have that information and can share it.
Okay, so UNLV did the initial study, did some follow-up with a small part of the cohort. So there's a report somewhere.
Yeah, we have a report.
Okay, when was the I guess the peel off? Like what year was that? Was it 23 or 22?
It ended in 23. The beginning of 23. So I think the grant was awarded in 21, and it went through the duration of 18 months. So we partnered with CSN. They went through the training. Some of the community health workers were placed in different FQHCs for training and practice, and were paid during that time frame out of the grant. And then after that, some of them remained on, and then some did not.
Okay, so another weakness that I'm hearing is we should probably limit our research dollars where we're studying our own people and leaving them with broken tires. I'm just saying, you're getting money to research a group in their poverty and then to move them forward. And then the research says, hey, we were able to do X, Y, and Z, but not really. You studied somebody like a lab rat, and then you didn't move them to economic mobility. And so to me, that has been a historic weakness for this community, is that, hey, let's take the research, let's study the poor people, and then the poor people are still poor when the research is done. And that can no longer be a strategy that I feel we take forward into our future if the research is not going to be a full wrap where the end result is taking the poor and then seeing them out of poverty at the end. And so I'm saying all of this to you because I'm writing these things down, because I feel like if we're really going to do this, right, and I love you guys for coming in and presenting this data, that we also have to be truthful about what is appropriate to move our communities forward, and to put things in place, like if I was never here again, to put things in place to make sure that the strategies that we put forth for our own people are going to deliver for our own people, Latina and Black and other, right, who live within these poverty communities. That is actually now no longer okay. That we need to make it one of our statements. It is no longer okay to accept research dollars that only study us and don't move us. And so I'm gonna make that one of my statements. All right,
Thank you, Chairwoman. So, Kathy Thomas, for the record, for clarification, this particular element of research actually studied the federally qualified health centers into which these workers were placed. Our assertion was that one of the reasons we have poor health disparities is because the institutions lacked the ability to effectively communicate. We often blame the patient for not advocating for themselves, and our position, our problem statement, if you will, said actually it's the institutions that communicate poorly. It's not us not advocating for ourselves. So point well taken that the dollars that we pursue as a community ought to be integrated into a more holistic strategy so that when a particular funding source ends, things don't drop off of a cliff. And that point is absolutely well taken. I've skipped a few slides because I think you guys can read the data and you've seen the maps, but I do want to talk about what I see as a wonderful opportunity if you're looking at larger strategies and equity, and that is a discussion around environmental justice. And that can be everything from the heat island effect to many of our neighborhoods. A freeway literally runs through it, and so the pollution, both the noise and the exhaust pollutions, disproportionately impact the communities that you all represent. It could be that we have fewer parks and active recreational spaces in the communities that we are discussing. And it could be that transportation doesn't connect these communities well internally or externally to job centers. So as you're looking at equity and a community economic development strategy, the opportunity to discuss environmental justice and all the elements within that frame would really present, I think, not only a competitive application, but an opportunity to create jobs and training in a demand occupation that often does not get discussed in the communities that we're focused on today. So there is a, as Mr. Edmond mentioned, several elements that are going into some redevelopment. The city and the Housing Authority have partnered to redevelop Marble Manor, and there's a transformation plan that was submitted to HUD, part of the Choice Neighborhood Initiative. And so this map now is showing you a lot of the areas where we will be targeting economic development, not only redoing the housing at Marble Manor, but looking at Jackson Street and Washington Avenue as economic corridors and using resources, again, through grants, to jumpstart the work in those areas. Also, a lot of discussion around the neighborhood improvements, so access to quality early childhood education, to looking at how do we preserve and honor the history and the culture, and do that in ways that create jobs. So I'll give you an example. When we were doing, y'all may remember, because folks were really mad about the church that will now be housing. But as part of that, we had to do some historic preservation work. And there was no one in the community. There were no historic photographers. I didn't even know there was such a thing as a specially trained photographer in historic preservation. And I couldn't find anyone in the community who could assist with that work. So part of honoring our history and preserving our culture also means training preservationists, archivists, historians who work in this space as photographers and architects. It's a different skill set. And as we remake the community in its own image, it would be wonderful if the folks who grew up here, who live here now, not only came to the table to voice an opinion, but were actually part of the folks who get hired to create this transformation. And so part of a neighborhood improvement strategy looks at honoring the history and the culture, not only through public art, but engaging in other meaningful ways to have folks participate at every stage of redevelopment. This is also about food-based amenities and dealing with food insecurity. So as you know, there are grow containers. The city has supported the Obodo Collective, which has a community farm, and is also looking at the redevelopment of James Gay Park for urban agriculture. And I make the distinction between community farms and urban agriculture. Throws off jobs, grows tons of food, becomes a supplier for grocery stores. And so that is a industry. Community gardens are social and cultural hubs focused on education, nutrition, and so they work together. They don't work as opponents. They work together to ensure that when we're doing food-based amenities in the community, that is also an economic and education driver. And lastly, public safety strategies emerged in conversations that we have been having with residents. And so how do you keep a neighborhood safe and not have it be overly policed? And so the coordination with law enforcement really spoke to a positive presence for them to be visible, but communicate. Don't just be there and not talk to folks, but increase visibility with communication. Meaningful youth engagement strategies, and talking about community-oriented policing that is actually community-oriented. Okay. I will stop there, and if there are questions, I'll answer them. Otherwise, I will pass the baton to Director Barajas.
There are more questions, but we'll just finish the presentation first.
Okay. So for the record, I am Marcelia Barajas. I am the Director of Neighborhood Services. I am not new to the department, though. I've been working alongside Kathy for the last 8 years, and 4 years of those as her deputy. So I've been very fortunate to be able to work with her on all of this work. So I'll be speaking briefly on the East Las Vegas plan. And so as Kathy mentioned with the 100 plan and all of the plans that we have for the historic West Side, we also have started doing some of this work in East Las Vegas. A couple of years ago, we started pulling out some of the old plans. We have the Rafael Rivera Walkable Community Plan that was done in 2014, and I'll speak a little bit more to the 3 plans in another slide, but we also have a neighborhood revitalization strategy area plan for this community, as well as the Nuestro Futuro East Las Vegas plan. A quick snapshot of this community, 21,534 is the median household income. 56% are Hispanic or Latino, 20% white, and 14% black. 56% of this community speaks a language other than English as their primary. 60% of the residents have a high school diploma, and only 7.6% have higher education. Nearly 40% live below the poverty level. More than 83% rent their homes, and 60% are considered rent burden. 40% have no vehicle for transportation, and this area faces some of the highest crime and homeless rates in the community. So these are the boundaries for this area. For our neighborhood revitalization strategy area plan, it's 95, Mojave on the east, Bruce, and then down to Charleston. These are similar. The other two plans that I mentioned are similar in radius or area to this location and encompass it. Okay, so we had some data slides, so I think they missed some of our slides. So part of this fund, like I mentioned, was just developed probably about a year ago. It was adopted by our city council, and similar to the 100 plan, we're calling this the Nuestro Futuro East Las Vegas Revitalization Plan. It encompasses our neighborhood revitalization strategy area work. For the neighborhood revitalization strategy area, we did a lot of community engagement of businesses and homeowners within the area. That's part of the requirements of the plan. And from that work came our, what we're calling the big moves, similar to the strategies in our 100 plan. They include public safety, promoting culture and history, mobility, ensuring community needs, so a lot of health access and support, youth and family engagement, and then adding economic opportunities for the community. Some of the things that we've already started doing to promote some of these big moves is in public safety. We've started providing a lot of resource and engagement to the community. We've had a lot of community meetings. We're providing a lot of resources through community flyers and events. We started a pilot called Listos and Seguros, which was to promote the collaboration between private and public partners to increase safety in the community. Part of that plan included a dumpster locking pilot for some of the businesses in the Charleston Plaza area. And so we were able to work with Republic Services to support some of those business owners with locks for their dumpsters. So that pilot is happening now. We're waiting on some of the data to see how it impacted some of the crime and trash and the alleyway behind that area. To promote culture, we've partnered with a local artist, Justin Favela, who will be working on a sculpture for this community. We just recently were awarded a grant from the United States Department of Transportation for $8.3 million for the Safe Streets that will encompass a lot of the area in the East Las Vegas. We have for health and wellness, so we just entered into an agreement with a federally qualified health center that will be helping us operate a health and wellness center off of Bonanza and Lamb, so it's not within the vicinity of this, but it will be accessible to a lot of the community members that live within the NERSA area. And the goal is that that will be constructed within the next 2 to 3 years. And then economic opportunities, so we did apply for a Brownsfield grant, so we have funding to support some of the landowners and vacant land areas within the area to remediate, to identify and remediate brownfields within that community. And I think that's it.
So I think we've done a lot of summarizing all the way through. The communities that we've been discussing in our case studies really face the highest level of need and really persistent lack of a number of resources and investment. And it is historic and current, right? So part of the reason a more comprehensive plan is important is to take the pieces that have been made available since COVID and knit them together in ways that are reflective of where we're headed. But there's an undergirding, some additional support to overcome historic patterns of disinvestment. And so this is important as we've shared a lot of data, and of course, very willing to make that available in comprehensive form so that we can continue to use this information to get additional resources brought into the community. And it can really be a model on how to work across communities of highest need. So we'll stop there, and we're happy to answer any questions.
Thank you for that. Members, any questions? Vice Chairman Steele.
Thanks so much for the presentation. I think it's fantastic, provides a lot of background information. I actually think, I don't know if this was the plan of the presentation, but I think it actually lays a pretty solid foundation for what the board can use in terms of updating its SEDS. I mean, it's in terms of just the different categories that were outlined in the presentation. I think it really gives, I think, us a basis to work off of. So thank you for that. I think a couple quick questions. In a lot of the projects that you mentioned, there's this public-private component, but it definitely seems like the private part of it is lacking. And so just curious in terms of recommendations, suggestions, you know, if you've looked at other similar areas that may be outside of this state that may be in a similar situation where you've seen incentives to encourage that private side, because the more that we rely on public investment, it's going to be the same kind of situation where you get a grant, that grant ends. I am, I think, a little hopeful that if SNCC is able to either take the lead on the SEDS or be a major component of a SEDS, then you have that ongoing funding source that can track and monitor some of the investments. But I'm curious just to learn from your experience, you know, what type of incentives may be out there to spur private investment.
Thank you for the question. Kathy Thomas, for the record. So I have often been offered a critique of financial institutions and other large institutions that have resources that have not seen these areas as a good bet. It feels risky. And yes, there have been communities where a large bank, which will remain nameless, in Detroit put $100 million on the table. There are other examples where different institutions in places like Philadelphia, Los Angeles, all communities, by the way, that have a different not-for-profit infrastructure. So that may be one of our challenges, is that there isn't this anchor institution that is a not-for-profit that functions here the way those anchor institutions function in other large or medium-sized cities. And all of these plans, we actively invited investors and financial institutions to come see what we were doing, literally put them on tour buses and drove them around, explained what we were doing, and no one would come in first. Government had to prime the pump, so to speak, to get private dollars to come in, to get philanthropic dollars to come in. And it's a slow trickle. So one of the first private housing developments in 70 years is finally coming in, 140 units right there on D Street. Prior to that, it's all public housing, either the Public Housing Authority or the city and county subsidizing the development of that housing. So I think conversations with those large institutions, both financial and philanthropic, represent an untapped opportunity for engagement in more meaningful ways. And now you can point to a couple of privately funded activities that are happening in these neighborhoods to say it's not so safe. Nobody wants to be from the private sector. No one wanted to be the first one in the pool. Well, hopefully having one or two folks stick their big toe in encourages others, but there does need to be a more comprehensive conversation about what equity looks like and not on the CRA side of on the development. Those are two different branches, if you will, within financial institutions. The CRA folks show up all the time. The community development folks often do not.
Thank you. I guess a quick follow-up to that. So if you look at cities like Detroit, Cleveland, there are some really major casino operators that decided, hey, we're going to actually make this investment, this private investment into redeveloping large swaths of the city. And I think you made a great point that the areas that we're talking about don't have that anchor from the private side. So I guess just as a follow-up question, what areas, and I think, you know, in your presentation, that 104 unit development is great. Would you encourage that investment to start off on the housing side, or are there other areas in which you see that private investment can come in, and not the financial institutions, but the actual private business?
Thank you, Kathy Thomas, for the record. Well, I'm a houser, so I'm always going to say come in on the housing side, because I believe it to be foundational to community building. I do believe that there are opportunities for private capital to partner with the redevelopment of commercial and retail opportunities that are latent, nascent, right? They're just in their embryonic stages. And so angel investors or venture capitalists actually have an opportunity unmatched, I think, in a lot of places where you have this incredible infill opportunity. You have an eager partner with the city of Las Vegas, and you have large pieces of vacant land that could be assembled to really support retail and commercial redevelopment.
Thank you.
Thank you for that. Member Scott?
Yes. Hey, Kathy. Hi. I'm gonna get, it's gonna all make sense at the end, but I guess I have a question for, is it Acelia? Acelia, all right. I love your presentation, especially, you know, for East Las Vegas and the planning documents that you presented. And I guess my question is, you know, Nuestro Futuro, Rafael Riviera Walkway, I'm very familiar with the NERSA also as a recipient of the grant. Are a lot of your plans based off of, I'm assuming that a lot of your plans are based off of your data and the population that you serve, correct?
Yes.
Right, and so is it safe to assume that if things were like different and say that the population was 50% white in that area, that the plans may reflect you may have a different set of plans?
So the plans were based on a lot of community engagement, so place-based plans. So yes, depending on what the community needs is how we develop some of the strategies.
Okay. Okay, so now segue into Kathy with the presentation with the West Side and the 100-year plan. I see no data that talks about the population. So how do you create a plan that's truly for the community if we don't know what the population look like to say what plan directly affects them?
Thank you for the question, Kathy Thomas, for the record. So we have a lot of demographic data for the area. In fact, it is probably one of the most studied areas over the past 20, 25 years. We didn't even list all of the plans. So we actually do have quite a bit of demographic data. It was used to frame engagement and surveys. What's really important about the West Side is that it is data-informed, not data-driven. It is driven by what stakeholders said is really, really important to stakeholders, which is why things like preserving the culture and the history come up again and again, because regardless of who the stakeholders are, that emerges as a top priority. Our commitment then is how do we use that priority and monetize it? How do we use it as part of an economic development strategy?
Thank you for that, but how do you have, who then become the stakeholders if the population in the community changes? And so, you know where I'm getting at, and it's okay. It's a safe space. where's the data? Where's the data that talks about what the population looks like on the west side of Las Vegas?
It's in the plan. It's not in this presentation per se. It is in the 100 Plan in action. So, for example, one of the demographic shifts that is happening is it's becoming less African American and more Hispanic. That is noted in the plan. It's noted that a lot of, and this is feedback we got during community engagement, where residents who live there said, you've been listening too much to people who come in on Sunday for church and then go back to wherever they live on Monday. And so a concerted effort was to engage the public housing residents, for example, who live there all the time. So the data is available, and none of the plans are static. That's why the 100 Plan in Action is called a plan in action, because it moves as the community moves. It expands or contracts as the community says, hey, this is important, that's not so important. Hey, more of this, less of that. We actually even had generational divides around public safety, where older residents were saying, more police, please, and younger folks were saying, whoa, that doesn't make me feel safe. And so the dynamic in terms of what community engagement is not a static thing. And Arcelia and I were sitting there going, how do we help this board with that engagement piece? Because it is not firm, fixed forever. It is evolving, and sometimes you have to plant a flag and say, we're going to do training around healthcare, just as an example. And that's one of the economic drivers we are going to focus on. Sometimes you have to make a decision and move, act. Because if you say it's changing today, it's going to change tomorrow, you are absolutely correct. And the beauty of equity is that it says, everybody, here's the process, here's how you get heard. And you have other processes for people who say, none of those processes work for me to be heard. And you have to be committed to figuring out the folks over here who don't feel heard, but you're transparent about your process and the ways that people can provide input. Here's how we defined a stakeholder for the West Side. If you play here, pray here, live here or work here, you're a neighbor.
I believe that. I tell a lot of my generation, anytime you maybe bought from Mario's or, contributed, stayed at an auntie's house, you then adopted the West Side as a community. That's your community. I believe that. I think I would be very careful with our words of just saying, when we use the word stakeholder, especially when they have influence to make or shake the dynamic of the community, when the majority of the population that control votes, that control your elected official, that controls the community, is going further away from the stakeholders that you're constantly having the meetings with. And so that's something that you have to be very cognizant of. And I think a lot of everyone dance around these conversations. And I'm not an I'm just an entrepreneur. So all I do is read data. I sell properties on the West Side all the time, right? I'm doing about 3-4 projects a month over there on the West Side. So I know what the data looks like. And so I encourage you, Kathy, to be very cognizant of that and make sure that the stakeholders are aligning with the population over there so that we can create programs that are truly effective for the population that we say we want to serve.
Ms. Garcia?
Yes, thank you. I want to thank you both for your wonderful presentation. I've learned so much and I've taken notes so I can share with my team. I was wondering if Ms. Barajas, you could speak a little bit more about the, I think it's called the Ready and Safe, Listos and Seguros,
Yes.
like one pilot, like the pilot program.
Yes, Arcelia Barajas for the record. And I apologize, there were more slides, and I think we had some issues, and they didn't make it to the presentation.
No
So I did have more information to share with you. But the Listos Seguros was a pilot. So we formed a committee that brought together public and private businesses, stakeholders, so Metro, our Department of Public Safety, some local business owners from the community, as well as just individuals that were that lived in the community for a long time, and so in the city, and we all came together and talked about some of the concerns that were being seen in the community. You know, safety was always one of the top ones in all of our survey work, and so we kind of came together to talk about what are strategies or things that we can do to help promote safety and you know, increase that community pride and safety for all of the individuals that live within that area. And so we had committee meetings. From there, we kind of talked about some of the different programmings and what are some of the main things that came out. You know, the homelessness was a big issue, crime, and so, you know, we did some alleyway assessments that determined some of the issues because a lot of the crime was happening regarding the copper theft and things like that. And so, you know, data was collected. We, as a group, discussed. We had some engagement sessions with the community, and then some of the pilot programs came about from there. And so the Listos and Seguros kind of included some different things within it, like the dumpster locking. We did have, so the pilot went for a year. We had a couple of other initiatives such as community meetings. We had flyers. We put together some material to share with families on safety. We had meetings where we brought Metro in and, you know, to help coordinate neighborhood watch programs and things like that. And so we actually did recently collect data from the first year of some of the initiatives and engagement that we were doing within that area, and we're able to see kind of a reduction in some of the crime rates and stuff that we collected from Metro.
That's amazing. Well, you know, I would be happy to facilitate a meeting with our team. I think they would be thrilled to be able to collaborate with you. We have a new director for community services and engagement. I think you've met him, Kathy, Mr. Ramos, and so I'm a big supporter of collaboration, and so thank you for what you're doing. Thanks so much.
Sure. Any additional member questions? So I have a couple before we go, so I can try to get these out here. So the CCI fund, when is that money going to end?
Oh, you go ahead.
So and those are comprehensive community initiatives. There are two grants. One was a planning grant for Choice Neighborhood. Okay. That's being implemented now. The larger grant that we do not yet know if we've received is a $50 million grant. We will be redeveloping Marble Manor over 5 phases, 8 years. And so we don't know if we got the larger grant. We got the $500,000 planning grant, which supported some resident engagement, some work at Obodo Garden, hiring some resident ambassadors to help with data collection and outreach. That $500,000 is wrapping up this year, and we hope sometime this summer we will find out about the larger grant.
Is there, and can you share a link to that, I guess the $500,000 plan? Because I guess you know what the historical argument is, because you've been on the city side. I mean, you come from North Las Vegas, now you're regional housing. That one of the major issues was how to invest and change Marble Manor but not displace, right? How to keep those individuals there. So I haven't been, you know, I maybe followed it when there was a big brouhaha like before COVID, but I haven't followed it recently. So were you guys able to put a plan together that does exactly that, that is going to create economic or upward mobility for those folks and not displace them out of the housing?
Yes, so that's the Choice Neighborhood implementation grant that we're waiting to hear back. Part of that implementation strategy includes relocation, and actually because it's a federal grant, we have to use Uniform Relocation Act standards. Every resident who currently lives there has the right to return there once the development is completed. And in the interim, during construction, we have to relocate them temporarily to like accommodation. So for example, if they are in a 3-bedroom unit now, during construction, they have to be relocated to a 3-bedroom unit. When the development for their phase is done, they have the option to return or to take a Section 8 voucher and stay in the community. And so resident choice is a huge component of this, and regardless of, you know, the result of this, Marble Manor will get redeveloped, and we will have to follow the Uniform Relocation Act standards.
So, question, Ms. What year is that Uniform Relocation Act? When was that passed? Is
The 70s.
So this
we can
is the
get you a
same
link.
one that was put in place
it's
when
a
Gerson
urban
was
renewal holdover, but we can get you a link. It's in 24 CFR something or another.
Okay, because I'm just wondering if it's the same act that's been in play as we have moved everyone else in Vegas.
Yes.
Is the strategy is one of the strategies while we're having these conversations? Because I know we had that big HUD housing forum. What was that, a week ago? Has there been a conversation with the congressional people or HUD or the current presidential group while they're down here pushing housing and everybody's looking for, you know, moments of glory, to really talk about whether or not there might need to be some tweaks to that Uniform Relocation Act, if that's possible? I mean, that's probably like a long-term goal because Congress is dysfunctional, so you probably can't pass anything anyway and get anything done. But if HUD has regulatory power to make some adjustments that might be more sustainable or suitable for Marble Manor relocation, are we having those kinds of conversations for safety for those residents? And when I say safety, meaning safety that you will remain to be housed and not homeless.
So Kathy Thomas, for the record, the conversation we had was for tenant protection vouchers, TPVs. So remember I said they can choose to come back or they can take a voucher and stay in the general community. We didn't speak specifically to the URA policy. We're going to follow whatever that policy is. The conversation we had is about the tenant protection voucher so that those tenants who opt not to return to Marble Manor still have a rent subsidy when they're, you know, shopping for housing in the open community. We have not made an effort to change or influence or whatever URA.
Yeah, because I'm just wondering if the URA, right? Because not all policy, legislative or state or congressional, has been favorable to communities of color, right? It could have passed in the 70s, but that doesn't mean that the policy itself is the best policy for us to be able to move our community forward. And so when we're talking about, because to me there's a policy discussion at the top, because if the policy and following the policy, when you're like reading it and you're like, aha, this is gonna freaking hurt 25 families, that policy is something at the front end we should navigate and see what those barriers and hurdles that are going to hurt our families, that were probably hurting our families in 1975, 1982, and 1995. And so that's why I asked that question, because politically the environment is ripe for these kinds of conversations to be like, hey, there's a sentence in here that actually is very much hurtful to communities of color because the way it is implemented affects us in a very negative way. And I'm wondering, have you guys done that super look to make sure that while HUD is, you know, hanging in the city because we have a 2024 election, that we're moving that policy discussion to be like, HUD, if you can change this, can we get this changed?
So, sorry, Kathy Thomas. No, we have not had the mega policy conversation specific to URA. The conversations we have had are related to things like funding formulas, which are outdated and right favor what we call legacy cities because their housing stock was older, but their population is leaving, but the funding doesn't follow the population. So in Vegas, where our population is growing, those same 1970 formulas dictate the amount of vouchers that we get. And so we have not had a sort of mega policy discussion specific to URA. And I should add in a footnote, because the CNI implementation grant process is competitive, we can't like lobby for ourselves, give it to us, give it to us. HUD is required to sort of treat all the finalists the same. And so if they talk to me for an hour, they got to talk to all other finalists for an hour, that kind of thing. So we haven't had nuanced conversations specific to URA.
Okay. If there's a public, like I would like to see, if somebody has that policy, I would like to see the URA in however, richness of its form, just because I think, as we moving forward, right, we're trying to avoid the barriers that have hurt us in the past and how we can move forward into the future. And if there is something in that policy that we probably need to pinpoint and get and deal with now, I think we should start having those conversations, not you, but we should be having those conversations to say, hey, wait a minute, we're moving forward to get $50 million when the policy in and of itself and the nuance of it is gonna hurt our community. And that means that we're destroying our own goal by not having a conversation about whether or not the policy is right for what we need, right? And I think we have a current environment where we can start, lifting that up and saying, hey, I need this. Why? Because someone wants the media op to say I gave 50 million, right? Nobody wants the media op at the end of the 50 million to be like, and then it went bad. And then it went in the toilet, right? And we want to avoid that because we don't want to continue to harm and wound our own folks, which might be something in the 1970 policy. And I just think, safeguarding. And I'm willing to read it. I have so much free time. I don't really sleep. So my next question is on the demographics. So in the 100 plan and then the 100 in action plan, that when you were talking about how much demographics we have, do we have a historical chart that shows the either maybe it could be the 5 to 10 year overlay of how it's changed over the 25 years, so we can have that as a historical framework. So if we're going forward in the SEDS, we're like, okay, here's the demographics for 25 years, here's how it's changed over 5 to 10 years, and here's who's changing. And then also, if any of that demographic data also shows the unemployment graph on top of it. And I don't know if anybody's ever done this work to see demographically, the demographics, the unemployment, and then do an overlay on any of the programs that we have implemented in order to build work within those communities and where they have actually been.
So we have the data on the demographics and kind of the change. The Hispanic community has significantly grown in this community, and so I know a lot of the data we've collected kind of has demonstrated that. We don't have it on maps and things like that like you're asking, but we can definitely get it and maybe do some overlays or work with our team to get that. But we do have the data on the change.
Yeah, because, GIS, technology is such that, you can do a scaffolded map that kind of shows you layers. The next one is when you were having the conversation with Member Steele about private dollars, I guess the question that I had was, when we start talking about private-public partnership, is this more foundations when we talk about private investment? who are we talking about, right? Because I remember when you brought in all of the folks, and I was like, hey, I know somebody from Goldman Sachs, and then it ended up being nothing, right? But how do we make sure that we start aligning who those private sector persons are and building those, as a board, building our interactions and conversations?
Thank you, Kathy Thomas, for the record. I believe the most effective strategy is inclusive of a lot of kinds of funders, depending on the project. So for commercial retail kinds of things, banks make a lot of sense. For housing, banks make a lot of sense. For your arts and cultural things, you may have philanthropic partners that make sense. And so I think it's less about the type of funding and more about the type of outcomes you want to achieve, because most funders are going to want to align their investment or their giving with specific outcomes. So I say take all comers, right? Like if banks are ready to pay for some housing, fantastic. If intermediaries like Enterprise or LISC want to come in and pay for capacity building, great. I don't know that I would focus on one or the other. I think I'd be more focused on a particular outcome to be achieved and then align the types of funders who also want those kind of outcomes.
Okay, so, and then if you guys have anything on any reports that you guys might have used for investment strategies, or how to prevent gentrification within the West Side, how to prevent divestment, right? Because ultimately, we're not having this conversation for 20 years for no reason. So there's a reason why there's displacement, and there's also a reason why there is a nuance to the strategy. And so I'm wondering, like, if there's any kind of guiding principles, research, reports, national, you mentioned Detroit, I don't know why they got $100 million when, we could never, right? There is something informative in whatever that research study is or was, or the end result product, because it's going to be whatever the similar factors for Detroit. And for us, I think it's important to either read, understand, and then know what that is as we move forward and build our case on why we need to be in a particular place, because we need to be talking about our nuance. The other thing, and this is the final question, and what do you believe are the human barriers on why we have not been able to move the needle, and what is it that we need to put in place to overcome those human barriers, and be honest and say, that there may be a barrier that you won't be able to overcome, that you might have to figure out how to, you can collaborate, but sometimes you're collaborating with somebody who's a living, breathing snake who is not going to help you get to your goal, right? The question is, how is it that you move there, and how do we get there? Because we're not trying to have this conversation 5 years from now. I think it's a hot seat, but you don't work here no more.
You're right. But I'm still gonna, Kathy Thomas, for the record, one of the things I observed when I was an employee and was in the community, and I said a lot, the city's got to rebuild trust with the community. The deeper I began that work, and as you know, I've been doing it 15, 20 years, and I had an epiphany. It's not that folks don't trust the city, because we're a known quantity, good or bad. Folks didn't trust each other.
Who do you mean? Do you mean black to black, Latino to black, black to city? Who's not trusting?
Across institutions, church to church, school to church, civic group to whomever, that organizations and individuals in the community working for the betterment of the community are going it alone. I even started saying things like, don't tear down silos. I don't need you to tear anything up because we're in building mode here. Can we build bridges? So I'm not coming in on your turf trying to tear down your silo. I'm simply saying whatever you've got in that silo, can we bring it out into the community space? I told people, it's okay if you have an agenda. I have an agenda too. The difference is my agenda is on the table and other people's agendas were behind their back. If we all put our agenda on the table, I can find that one area where we can all agree on something and work from there. So the human barrier to your question is mindset, and you don't shift that over the course of a 5-year grant.
No.
So, to my point, what I was saying to the other board member is sometimes you plant your flag and you get to work. The folks who want to do that work will show up and help do that work. It doesn't have to be perfect or pretty and pristine. It has to be meaningful and transformative. And transformation is sometimes messy, sloppy, scary, and is a body, this is the challenge when you are doing a document that in effect will be a government document. If you put together a SEDS that has specified metrics and identified partners and aligned with the priorities from EDA, that doesn't lend itself to messy. But that's no reason not to do that. So as a board, pick the thing you're gonna do. Will help. And the folks who understand, value, appreciate that piece of the work will show up to get that piece of the work done. And maybe the naysayers will go, oh, okay, they were serious about change and transformation.
You don't get rid of naysayers, but what you do, I want to know, so in the folks who were going it on their own, right? I mean, because we're going to have the folks who are have been doing it on their own because they felt the government wasn't going to help them, right? And so they decided to take action. What did you learn in your 20 years of processes and community meetings of hallelujah and thank you, Jesus? Did you learn that is the one sentence that doesn't set off the room, but at least allows the conversation to continue to say, all right, I understand that you also want self-empowerment, which we want to protect, we want to maintain. But how do we move from allowing groups that are continuing to be empowered and then build the global connection for them to, under a SEDS, to say you are a part of this conversation and the work that you are doing, we are not trying to halt it, nor are we trying to take credit for it, but we're trying to mold it into. And if you say, well, I never got there, right? But I did get a couple of lacerations. I can understand that too. Because that is the work that we're getting ready to go into, right? I mean, unity is our goal. But sometimes unity is thwarted by who doesn't want to play, as you said, who wants credit, who is still looking to plant their flag above everyone else. And then sometimes government, and we have to be honest, that sometimes government is also a barrier to us moving. So, this is a big undertaking, right? And I'm not confused about it because I've already gone through my own neighborhood building exercise, which has caused a lot of stress. And so I'm just wondering, what are the things that we're really, really walking into? Because I know what I experienced just for neighborhood building. It was vicious. Mm-hmm. It was hands down vicious and continuing. And I'm okay with that. But if we all know what fight we're getting into, and we know how you're gonna put the boxing gloves on and keep them on and move forward, then I just want you to just kind of help understand what that is. If you're saying, well, there's gonna be, and I get it that we might be in tussles for a really, really long time, but if folks are like, oh, you're never gonna get this from them, and they'll come and play and they'll say all nice words and then stab you in the back later, well, I'm gonna need that on the sidebar conversation.
Yes. So there's not one sentence.
Oh, okay.
But what I have observed to be most effective: unafraid leadership, unapologetic vision. So it helps when there's a leader who picks up the banner and carries it and says to the worker bees, just get the work done. I'll take the blows, I'll take the arrows, I'll take the slingshots. Y'all keep working. Unafraid leadership. An unapologetic vision that says we can have a community that includes these things, whatever the says you're going to do. And we don't have to apologize because we said, you don't make small business loans to black folks, to bankers. That says there are health disparities that black and brown people experience that other people in our city don't experience. Are you going to invest in health centers with us? An unapologetic vision that says not only is it possible, but we are the ones to do it. So I guess I'd add a third thing: unashamed accountability. It worked or it didn't work. They cussed me out, they celebrated me, whatever happened, because I feel you, and all of that has happened to me. But if you have leadership and vision and accountability, you can move this forward.
Okay, all right, well, I'm in for ridiculous reasons. However, I want to look up any legislative policy, and I'm going to put this on me and put this on legislative staff, any legislative policy that we have passed in the past, 10, 15 years, 20, that maybe has negatively impacted this work or positively impacted this work. But I think we should have that as a backdrop, so as we know if there's something in the state house space that needs to be adjusted while we're in the work, so that we can move all of these communities forward. Because if we have some law in the book that is going to keep our people poor, keep our people unhoused, keep our people not moving forward in whatever the categories that we're going to take on, which we kind of know what they are, we need to remove those barriers in the policy and the law space so that there's more freedom in this space to then actualize what we need to do. And I think that's one of the foundational measures that we got to think about, right? Because it's important, and I don't want any barriers to get in the way, so that when we're dealing with human-to-human fights, at least we don't have a law hanging over us that's saying, well, that sentence needed to be changed in order for you to effectualize what you wanted to do in 2025, right? And I think that, and if you know of any policy that's out there, spend the time thinking about something that we passed that we didn't think about because we weren't doing the work, and we put in policy to try to do X. Or it was a policy that was tried and it died because folks didn't want to see it, right? I mean, we need to know what that is, because if we're going to do this strategy has to work on all fronts, right? And so it's just something I want you guys to think about, because that's one of the notes that I was writing to myself, to look at that and then to start reading everything and consume it all, so that we are at least in a knowledge position to understand what we're taking on and why we're taking it on. So when we put forth this writing, the writing also comes with knowledge and understanding on what we're going into and why it's going into as we partner right? You're our first presentation for data, but as we continue to build the data and then build the story and then the economic positioning that we want to do, we have to be in the strongest and best position, and we also need to be willing, like I said earlier, to call out grant and research projects that are not to our benefit and to turn them down and to not say, okay, it's not okay actually for us to take any of these things because it looks good, but we don't want it because we've already seen this run out. And I think that if we go into the community with those kinds of conversations, I think we're going to be in a much better position because the old people know, man, that's why they beat us up. They'd be like, absolutely not. And I've been here since the 70s. And the young people beat us up because they have vision. And they're like, you keep doing the same thing. And we see the problem because we're living it daily. And you keep coming with that same old, haggard, ridiculous statement, and I'm not accepting it anymore. And so I think we know what we need to do, but we also have several constituencies inside of one. But I like problems. So let's go. let's figure it out how we can move this forward. Vice Chair Steele. Yeah.
Thank you, Chair. This is going to be really, really brief, and this is just more one statement and then just a quick question. Just in my conversations and doing research for why there's a lack of private investment happening and coming to the SNC covered jurisdictions, one of the common themes has been the lack of density. And so that's been consistent across private developers, on the commercial side, on the residential side, as well as financial institutions. When you look at the SNC area, I've just going through the SEDS, and less than 15,000 households in the SNC region, less than 50,000 persons is the population. And so when you compare, the SNC, coverage area compared to other regions that may be applying for similar funds or maybe looking for those same developers or those same institutions to come in, one of the reasons that keeps coming up over and over is just the impact may not be there for the investment. And you could think of that from a workforce standpoint. You can build a $20 million workforce facility, and maybe a couple hundred people will utilize that, and so, or that may be the projection that's out there. And so it made me start thinking, and I think this conversation kind of sped up that thought process, is that maybe we can look at other SEDS or other areas that may be similar. I know you mentioned some cities, but those cities aren't similar. Those cities may be similar, maybe to Las Vegas, but like for our region, it'll be helpful, maybe not now, maybe, we can follow up, but it'll be helpful to look at other SEDS regions that have gone through a successful, implementation plan, so that we can try to gain some best practices, and maybe we can even lean on those same areas to bring in those developers or those training programs that have already demonstrated that they're willing to operate in those similar sort of regions, and then try to bring them here. That's one thing I don't think we've done much of, at least from a board standpoint, is to look for what similar partners that have already made investments in other locations. That would be helpful, because I know you've had a lot of experience talking to a lot of people, and it'll be great to just see if we can see where there's already been some alignment in the past instead of trying to convince people.
Yes.
Thank you. Great presentation. Great questions. Great follow-up.
Yeah, thank you guys. All right, so we will close the presentation. We will close agenda item number 7 and open up to agenda item number 8, which is citizens' participation. Is there anybody here for public comment? If so, come to the mic. You have 2 minutes. Okay, seeing no one coming up, then I will go to agenda item number 9, which is an adjournment. I don't have to take a motion on that, right? Okay, so we will go ahead and adjourn the Southern Nevada Enterprise Community Board meeting on May 20th.